President Biden's meeting with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on Monday didn't yield a deal on a debt ceiling just yet, but both sides said that the talks were productive. And Speaker McCarthy pledged to speak with the president daily until a deal is done. For more on this, we want to bring in Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. He is the ranking member of the Commerce Committee and a member of the Foreign Relations and Joint Economic Committees. And Senator, thanks for being here in SAT.
Good morning, Becky. Good to be with you.
All right, we were just talking off camera, and I told you I'm so sick of the debt ceiling talks. Nobody really knows what's going to happen except for Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden. Maybe they can work out something great. I will ask you, because we have to, do you think something happens? Do you think a deal gets done?
Look, I hope so, and I think it probably does. Right now, it's a game of chicken, and the question is who's going to swerve. I think the House passed a good bill. I'm glad House Republicans actually stepped forward and led. This was now several weeks ago. They passed a bill that raised the debt ceiling, but also that takes real steps to rein in the out-of-control spending. What has happened on the spending and debt side is crushing. It is unprecedented. And I think the House bill has reasonable and modest steps. It's designed to cut $4.8 trillion over 10 years. And I think it's a very reasonable piece of legislation. Obviously, the White House is not going to agree to it exactly. But I think it lays out a good roadmap of where they should go. The question is, you know, Joe Biden started off with a position he wouldn't talk at all, he wouldn't compromise, he was unwilling to consider anything. That was obviously unreasonable, and he had to fold from that because that didn't withstand scrutiny. Where we are now, I don't know if the White House is willing to be reasonable. I'll tell you what I've encouraged President Joe Biden to do, which is listen to Vice President Joe Biden. In 2011, the last big debt ceiling showdown we had, where Republicans held a line and said we need to rein in spending, it was Vice President Joe Biden who negotiated what was called the Budget Control Act, designed to cut $2.3 trillion in spending. And he sat down with Mitch McConnell and with the House Speaker, and they negotiated that deal. I hope Joe Biden as president has at least some modicum of the same willingness to do that. I'm worried that he doesn't have the ability to do it anymore.
Look, I will say honestly, this is going to be a negotiation that plays out. Kevin McCarthy definitely has a stronger hand because he passed the bill in the House. That gives him a stronger negotiating power. He is not going to take something to the floor that he can't get at least a majority of his caucus to sign off on. So hopefully the two of them can work some sort of a deal out. Look, I think we both agree that it's not a good scenario in any way, shape, or form if we default on our debt.
We should absolutely not default on the debt. And I will tell you, I am more worried now that we might default than I ever have been.
Really?
And the reason is I don't think Biden is up to the task. I don't think he's engaged in the negotiations personally and directly. I think
they're talking and sitting and meeting every day.
Yeah,
it may be later than we want.
His mental capacities are markedly diminished from even a few years ago.
Senator, don't make me go through this.
And what makes me worry is that I think the decision making in the White House is being done by a bunch of 20-something and 30-something little Marxists who don't have an appreciation for reality.
Oh, I told you I didn't want to dig into this. We're going to get stuck digging into this. I mean, I will say the same argument. There have been people who questioned the last president's ability to be able to have rational conversations and do these things. There were people who were talking about having him removed with the 25th Amendment. But look, he's in the room. He's making the talks. Hopefully we get something out of it.
I can tell you the reality. All right, when the Senate is in session, every Republican senator, we have lunch together. We sit around and talk about how virtually none of us have spoken to the president even once. He doesn't talk to Republican senators, and that's weird. We all know Joe. I was sworn into office by Vice President Joe Biden. He was a man of the Senate. This White House hides him, and it's unfortunate.
Didn't McConnell just meet with him?
McConnell had met with him briefly, but it is. I used to talk to Trump every week, sometimes every day. I spoke with Obama. I spoke with Obama regularly. It is weird. Lindsey Graham has flown all over the world with Joe Biden for 20 years. Lindsey hadn't talked with Joe. They keep him hidden. That's not disputed. Like nobody denies that they keep him hidden.
He's not doing media.
He doesn't do media. He doesn't do.
Just sit down with McConnell, and McCarthy is talking to him every day.
He also just went to the G7. It's not like this guy is hiding.
Hold on a second.
I don't want to be in the. I don't want to be in the corner of defending
anybody. He's intellectually acute and on things. Great. If he is, then he ought to do what he did in 2011. I don't think he is, and I'm worried because I think the young extreme staffers in the White House have no appreciation for just how damaging a default would be. And so I think they are quite willing to force a default because they think the media will blame it on Republicans. And I think that would be wildly irresponsible.
The talking points I hear all the time is that this would be much worse for the president to go into a default because he's the president who would get blamed in the next election cycle, which is why Donald Trump is urging anyone in the House to say no. Don't do this. Vote against it.
I don't think that's what the White House believes. I think the White House believes whatever happens, the media will blame it on Republicans. Whether that's true or not, I think that's what the White House believes. And one thing to be clear, Joe Biden today could take the chances of a default to zero. Here's what I think a responsible president would say. He would stand up and say, under no circumstances will we ever, ever, ever default on the debt, no matter what. The United States honors our commitments. Now, how could he do that?
He could do that by claiming the 14th Amendment and saying he's going to pay out. And I know you
except that would be patently unconstitutional. But he could do it in a very simple way that is clearly legal, which is that every month federal tax revenues coming into the federal government significantly exceed interest on the debt. And he could say, we're going to pay interest on the debt. We're not going to default.
We're not going to pay everything else.
That's what's called prioritization. Right. He could do that.
And they very well may get to that situation at the beginning of
They may get to that situation, but the reason that he hasn't said that, which he could say, he could take the chances of default to zero. The reason he hasn't is I think the White House is trying to scaremonger on this. They're trying to threaten default.
Well, not paying the rest of our bills would not be great either.
Well, but
do you stop paying the veterans? Do you stop paying the Defense Department? Do you stop paying the salaries of people in Congress?
Okay, not paying the salaries of people in Congress would actually be a pretty good step. So that
those should be the first bills they don't pay, actually.